QR codes at your table as well, and give a big warm welcome to Steve and Mandy.
In the spirit of the conversation that just took place, I think that we should get started with a perfect example of our friend Steve Moore, who, by the way, not only was part of Trump's economic advisors who really brought an era of prosperity to the United States before COVID hit so hard. So big round of applause for that.
Yeah, for sure.
Steve has also agreed to continue to advise President Trump during this campaign, and should he become president, continue to create economic policies that move the country forward. So another big round of applause for that.
Thank you.
But never let it be said that Steve is not willing to reach across the aisle, and we have a short video of Steve doing just that. Go ahead and roll that video.
We want to pay higher taxes, and everyone else wants to pay higher taxes as well.
Hi, Steve Moore here. I'm here at the Patriotic Millionaires press conference where a bunch of millionaires said they want to pay higher taxes and they're advocating for it, but they won't sign a pledge saying they're willing to pay the taxes that they endorse. In fact, not one of these patriotic millionaires raised their hand and said, I'm willing to pay more taxes voluntarily.
Welcome to Tax Day, one of the most segregated, most unequal, and one of the most unjust days of the year in America.
It's about billionaires owning super yachts and Rolexes, while hardworking people are struggling to afford their rent or going to sleep hungry.
The poor and the working class are not going to bring this country down. It's the wealthy that'll bring the country down.
It's time to enact a new tax code that requires those who benefited the most from America's economic structure to recycle a significant portion of that benefit back into our society, rather than allowing them to amass fortunes so large that they threaten our democracy.
Hi, thank you, by the way, for doing this, and it's incredibly patriotic what you're talking about in terms of being willing to pay more taxes. I think, Myron, you started out this press conference by saying you want to pay more taxes. And so I represent a group called the Committee to Unleash Prosperity, and we have these pledges. How many of you are millionaires here? I know you are, a number of you. We're hoping that each one of you will sign this pledge, which says that you will pay a 90% tax, just as you're endorsing today, because you say it's your patriotic duty to do so. And so I'm hoping that each one of you will sign this pledge that says, I'm willing to pay a 90% tax, because it's your, as you said, it's your patriotic.
Let me understand. You want me to do that individually, or you want me to do it
Miss Disney? Yeah, let's get people, I've got pens, let's sign these, you know, so we can solve the problem.
policy, or do you want me to do it?
No, we want, you all said that you wanted to pay, you said you wanted to pay more taxes.
We want to change the system.
No, you said you want to pay more taxes, so don't you think it's your duty?
Can we keep this to press?
I'm sorry, don't you think it's your patriotic duty to pay more taxes if you're saying that?
That the voluntary paying of more is not going to.
But you all are
Yeah,
millionaires.
sorry, we
right?
got another question.
Okay, I'm just, because you guys are millionaires, and you're saying you don't want to pay more. Wait, you do or you don't want to pay more taxes? What?
Yes, it's disingenuous to say
Why?
that voluntary change to the law is going to make a structural difference.
But you all could make a huge difference. There's a little bit of hypocrisy when a bunch of millionaires get together and say raise taxes, but they're not willing to pay them themselves. Out of the 20 millionaires here, not one of them was willing to pay more taxes. I've got to tell you all that I couldn't have scripted that better, right? I mean, we should now call them the hypocritical millionaires, not the patriotic millionaires, because they all want somebody else to pay more taxes. They don't want to pay taxes themselves. But it's an example of how we really need to, as a movement, really call these people out, because they are hypocrites. They want other people to do things that they're not going to do themselves.
Steve has prepared a little bit of information because we're here today to talk about the beauty of Bidenomics. I don't know if you guys realize, but Joe Biden has actually been now using Bidenomics as a positive when he's out talking to people. So I thought it would be constructive if we could just kind of dig into some details of what Bidenomics really has done for the nation.
Fantastic. Well, I have a few charts. By the way, Jennifer, thanks so much for inviting me. I think I was at your very first Steamboat Institute. I think there were about 50 people there, and now it's like 400. So Jennifer is a superstar, isn't she? And I'm just honored to be here. So I thought I'd just show you a few charts on what's going on with Bidenomics, because sometimes a picture really is worth 1,000 words. So can we put those slides up? Okay. So this is the tragedy of what we did in 2020 and 21. And we spent $6 trillion, $6 trillion, which adjusted for inflation was more money than we spent to fight and win World War II, when the entire US economy was turned into a military economy to win, to beat the Nazis and the Japanese. And that's never been done before, that we've spent that much money. And by the way, can we all agree, can everyone in this room agree that we will never, never, never allow our government to shut our businesses down again?
Yes.
Never will they shut down our schools again. Never will they shut down our churches, our playgrounds. I believe it was the single greatest mistake in American history when we locked down our economy. How many of you agree with that? I mean, it was outrageous, and it was, it had no positive, by the way, there were virtually zero positive effects from lockdowns, none whatsoever. If you look across the states that stayed open had no different death rates from COVID than the states that locked down. Where were you in Colorado? Did you shut down?
Briefly.
What'd you do?
Briefly, we shut down, and I will have to give a little tiny bit of credit to our governor.
He was pretty good for a Democrat.
For a Democrat, he was great.
Yeah.
But that's like being valedictorian of summer school. I mean,
Sure
you
is.
know.
Biggest midget in the room.
Yeah.
So this was a tragic thing, and I wanted to show you next that what happened in 2020, you know, we all consider ourselves to be a free enterprise, free market country, not a socialist country. And yet in 2020, for the first time in the history of our country, the government was actually larger than our entire private sector. All output from major businesses. We cannot allow that to happen again. And today even, the government as a share of our total economy today is at about 38 to 40% of GDP. 38 to 40%. So we're moving in the direction of socialism. And what we have to do, Mandy, I think the correct amount of government spending, a percent of our GDP, should be about, by the way, I'm talking about all levels, local, state, and spending, and federal. That should be probably about 20 to 25%, right? Not 35. So we've got to take a chainsaw to the budget, and no budget is more out of control than Washington. Now, this is what Biden came in, and look, remember Rahm Emanuel? He was the chief of staff.
Never let a crisis go
He
to
said
waste.
something very famous when Obama came into office. He said, a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. And what he meant by that was the left is very good at seizing on a crisis and spending all the money on these programs that they wanted to spend. Most of what we spend on money on COVID didn't even have anything to do with COVID, especially under Biden. It was basically just all of their wish list of green energy programs, social welfare programs, income redistribution programs that they had never had the ability to get through, and say they used COVID as the mechanism to pass these massive spending bills. And you can see it was one after another, the blue state bailout, the Green New Deal, the corporate welfare bill, all of these things, student loan bailouts, and we've never seen anything like this before. I'll put it very simply, Mandy. I believe Joe Biden is the most financially reckless president in American history. No question about it. And so this is tragic. I love this one. It's day 275 of Build Back Better. Are you better off? Of course, you know, this is what happens when you spend money is you have, I wanted to show you, I think this is a really fascinating chart. By the way, anybody wants these charts, I'm happy to make them available to you. So this is just the history of the United States, government spending since the United States became a nation in 1787. And you can see that what you're looking at is the government debt. And you can see that every time we had a crisis in America, the government would step in and spend money to deal with the crisis. You know, that happened in the Revolutionary War. It happened, obviously, at the Civil War, World War I, the Great Depression, World War II, the Cold War. But then, if you notice the chart, what's so interesting is that when the crisis was over, we paid down the debt. We paid down the debt. And we were pretty disciplined in every instance. You can see even after the Cold War, we did that. What is so sinister
about what is happening in Washington today is COVID is over. COVID ended 2 years ago. And yet we should be paying down the debt, and we have added $8 to $10 trillion to our debt at a time when we should be paying it down. And that is a horrific development. Now, what is the consequence of that? Massive inflation. I mean, why is anybody surprised that the inflation rate went to 9.2% when Biden came into office? Why is anybody even shocked by that? It was so obvious this was going to happen, and you can see the inflation rate went way up. It has come down, but today, by the way, how many of you in this room think inflation's really only 3.5%?
No.
How many of you think it's over 10%? You know, I do. And you know, you and I were talking about the things that you have to buy, your groceries, your gas bill, your rent, your mortgage, all of these things are way up. And so this idea that we have a 3.5% inflation rate is crazy. Everything is about 20% more expensive today than it was when Biden came into office. Anybody know what the inflation rate was? Do you know, Mandy, when Trump left office?
I do not, but I bet you do.
Anybody know? 1.5%. How do you go from 1.5% to 9.2% inflation in a year and a half? Oh, incidentally, can I just ask, how many of you think what they're doing is deliberate? Raise your hand. Is this a way to burn down the village so they can rebuild it? Because you look at all of these things that Biden is doing, and you think, why would you, if you love the country, why would you do these things? So this is what's going to kill, this is why Biden is not going to be reelected. Under Trump, and we were very proud of this, we raised median income for the average household in America in just 4 years by $6,500. This is I'm not talking about rich people. I'm talking about the very middle income people had the biggest gain in income than under any other president in history. We're proud of that. I mean, you may not like Trump, but you've got to love his policies. Now, look at that chart. Now look at this. This is what's happened under Biden. So I showed Donald Trump these charts just a week ago when I went to see him in Bedminster. A $6,000 increase in income under Trump, a $4,000 reduction in income under Biden. I think if it turns out that it's Biden and Trump, and there's still a lot that can happen, obviously, in this election season, but if it is, it's very clear what Donald Trump does to win. He looks right in that camera. How many of you remember the 1980 debate between Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan? I don't know if many of you remember that. But there's a very famous moment in that debate where Reagan looked straight in the camera in front of 120 million people, and he said, "Are you better off today than you were 4 years ago?" Remember that? Are you better? And most Americans said, hell no. And Reagan obviously won a landslide election. That's exactly the question that Donald Trump should ask if it comes to those two. Are you better? By the way, how many, raise your hand today if you're better off than you were 4 years ago? I can't, can you? I mean, most people can't. So that's a critical thing. This is just, do you know, I'll stop with this, and then there's a lot of issues we have to deal with. There were 13 Nobel Prize economists, 13, who a year and a half ago wrote in the New York Times, "Don't worry, Joe Biden's policies won't cause inflation." I mean, it's laughable, right? Now, don't you think if you said something that stupid, you should probably give back your Nobel Prize or give in your, I mean, that's the kind of craziness we're up against. So that's just a quick overview of like where this economy is right now.
You know, one of the things that a lot of people are already sending in questions about is to your point about spending and government spending.
Yeah.
After World War II, one of the charts that you showed was when the spike in debt in World War II. There was a lot of economists that said if you drastically cut government spending, the economy will collapse. And we know what happened after World War II. We had a great economic boom. Yes. But now we live in a different era where, honestly, to one of these questions points, economic illiteracy is at an all-time high.
Especially among PhD economists.
Well, and people really believe that we have this kind of inflation because of corporate greed, or they still have supply chain issues or any of the other reasons. How do you convince people, and especially the politicians that are making the policy, that cutting government spending must be done? Yeah. How do you make that argument without kind of ceding the ground to those PhDs who say the sky is falling if we cut any program?
Well, look, every time we have cut government spending in this country, we've had an economic boom. I mean, you go back to this is the 100-year anniversary of one of the great underrated presidents of all time, Calvin Coolidge, great president, right? And Calvin Coolidge cut tax rates from 75%, because after during World War I, the worst president in American history, Woodrow Wilson, raised the top tax rate to 75%. We cut the top tax rate from 75% to 25% in this country. What do you think happened to federal revenues? Do you think they went up or they went down?
It went up.
They went way up. We had the biggest boom in American history. We had a massive reduction in government spending after World War I, as you saw from that chart. Government spending doesn't stimulate anything but government, right? Government spending takes away from the private sector. We have to take on this crazy Keynesian notion that when the government spends money, that somehow it's stimulating the economy. It doesn't. And in fact, what's worst about what Biden spent money on, he didn't even spend money on roads or our military. He spent money on giving money to people for not working. And so we did a study at the Heritage Foundation that found that in Biden's first 2 years in office, families could earn $100,000 of government benefits, food stamps, rental assistance, cash payments, Medicaid, blah, 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 blah. $100,000 and not work a single hour. A single hour. So that's the kind of thing. We need to have work requirements for every single welfare program, right? If you're going to get a government benefit, you have to work for it. So I think that's the answer to the question. Incidentally, the time in the last 30 years that we cut government spending the most, do you know who was president when government spending fell the most over the last 35 years?
I'm going to guess
Bill Clinton, a Democrat. Now you had a Republican Congress, but this government spending came way down under Bill Clinton. And what happened to the economy in those years? Went through the roof. So that's the case that Republicans make.
Let's take that question to the next step. Entitlements are a huge part of government spending. How do you bring down government spending and protect entitlements, or are those two things at odds?
I agree with Donald Trump. I think that it is crazy for Republicans to even be talking about Social Security. Look, here's my attitude about Social Security. 40 years ago today, does anybody know what the Dow Jones Industrial Average was 40 years ago? It was 1,200. 1,200. What's the Dow Jones Industrial Average at today? 34,500. My entire professional career, I've always said the single most important entitlement reform we need in this country is to let every single young American put their money into a 401k plan, not Social Security.
Yeah.
And if they had done that, by the way, every single baby boomer who is about to retire, every retiree today would be a pension millionaire. They would be getting a monthly payment that would be 5 times higher than what Social Security is offering people. So my attitude is, no, Social Security benefits aren't too high. They're way too low. Every single worker in America, from the day they start working till the day they retire, has to hand over 12% of their paycheck into the black hole of Social Security. It's robbery. It's thievery.
But how do you fix that now that we know that Social Security is essentially operating like a Ponzi scheme?
Yeah,
where
it's
my
always been
money
a
is
Ponzi
paying
scheme.
other
You've
people's
got to stop the
benefits.
Ponzi. You've got to move from a defined benefit program to a defined contribution plan. By the way, to make this optional, we want to win young voters over to our movement. The best way to do it is say, look, we're not going to force you to hand over 10% of your paycheck each month to the government. You can invest in yourself. By the way, this would make a nation of capitalists. Every American would own a piece of the rock under this plan. So now, we need to grow the economy. If we can get the economy to grow by 3% per year, because when you look at those forecasts of where the debt is headed, they're projecting 1.5% growth. Well, hell no, we can't grow at 1.5% growth. We've got to get back to the 3.2% growth path that we've had since the end of World War II. And you know what? Because of what Albert Einstein called the most powerful force in the universe, which is compound interest, if you get a higher growth path, our debt to GDP ratio will start to. So I want Republicans to focus on growth, and I'll show you one chart. I'll tell you something that I think is absolutely essential, and I think everybody in this room will agree with this. This is the most nefarious thing of all of Biden's policies. That's why I asked you, how many of you think that this is intelligent? I mean, it's something that they've actually planned. They're doing this on purpose. Do you see the green line there? This is U.S. energy production. And you can see from 2007 to 2019, we had one of the greatest booms in American energy production in history. And why was that? It was something called the shale oil and gas revolution. Overnight, it changed the entire geopolitical map of the world. If you look at that chart, we tripled our oil and gas production in 12 years. Remember when the left used to say we have to stop using oil and gas because we're running out of it? Remember that? Well, folks, we're not running out of oil and gas, we're running into it. Look at that. We have 500 years worth of natural gas, we have 300 years worth of oil, and we have 600 years worth of coal. We should be using it, right? We should be using American energy. And so here's you can see what happened under Trump. And I think I told this story, Jennifer, at your conference a couple of years ago. But my first meeting when Larry Kudlow and I first sat down with Donald Trump in late 2015, when he was first running for president, one of the first things I said, I'd never met him before, and I just said, Donald, at that time we called him Donald, not Mr. President. I said, if we just stay on this path, I said, in 4 years, if you're president, the United States can be energy independent. I'll never forget, Trump slammed his fist on the table, and he said, Steve, I don't want America to be energy independent. I want America to be energy dominant. And we became dominant. I mean, look at that. We surpassed our output of oil and gas over what Russia and Saudi Arabia were producing. How many times did we talk about OPEC when Trump was president?
Yeah.
Never. We didn't talk about OPEC. How can you have a cartel when the #1 producer of oil and gas isn't part of your cartel? We crushed OPEC by just producing more and more and more of oil and gas. I know I'm going on too long, but I want to say another. How many of you watched the debate the other night? Raise your hand. I was in Milwaukee. I think that the Republicans fumbled the issue of Ukraine. And I know probably in this room, everybody has different opinions about what we should do about Ukraine. But here's what I would say, and this is what I've told Trump to say. If Trump had still been president, there is no way in hell that the Russians would be in Ukraine today.
Yep.
There's just no way it would have happened. And you know why? Because what we're doing by reducing American oil and gas, who is the biggest winner in the world when we reduce American oil and gas?
Yep.
Putin. We're playing right into we're financing the Russian military machine by not producing oil and gas. If we just went full spigot, drill baby drill, we can bankrupt Russia. Wouldn't that be a better thing than sending $200 billion to the Ukraine? So this is the solution. Now, look at this green line. Look at how it projects down. That's, ladies and gentlemen, the Biden energy policy. I'm not making this up. This is their policy. They want to go to zero on U.S. oil and gas production over the next 12 years. Can you think of anything dumber than that? I mean, this is crazy. Now, let me show you what the impact this would have. That's the other thing. Is there anybody in this room, seriously, if you think I'm wrong on this, please raise your hand. I want to hear from you. Is there anybody in this room who thinks that President Xi cares about climate change?
Oh, no.
Seriously. Because, well, actually, there are only 2 people in the United States who think that, Mandy. One is Joe Biden, the other is John Kerry. And, they're the only 2 people. And John Kerry, you've noticed that John Kerry goes to these stupid, takes his jet plane over all these climate change conferences. He says, we have very good discussions with the Chinese. They're really in on it. And the Chinese are laughing behind our back. Look at this. See that line that goes straight up? That's Chinese coal production. They're not reducing their greenhouse gases. They're massively increasing them. And that's the other thing the Republicans fumbled that question on. The Republican policy should be, we'll start reducing our greenhouse gas, by the way, which we've done, when China does. And they're not anywhere. And by the way, one other quick quiz question, then I'll get back to this. Do you know, who knows in this room, what country over the last 20 years has reduced its carbon emissions the most?
We have.
USA.
Yes.
Raise your hand if you knew that.
I did.
I mean, almost all of you. If you didn't know that, you can be forgiven, because the press never says that. They would never. Now, here's a bonus question. I'll give a signed autographed copy of my new book if you get this one right. How is it the United States has been reducing our carbon emissions? Shout it out if you know. Natural gas. How many said natural gas? Raise your hand. You are spot on correct. Natural gas is a wonder fuel. it is cheap, it's abundant, it's made in America, it's reliable, and it's clean burning. It's everything you want in a fuel, and the left is against it. So why? Why is the left against natural gas? It means that there's something more sinister going on here than climate change. They're trying to shut down the American economy.
Well, and to
I
your
rest my
point,
case.
Steve, I read an excellent column, and I honestly don't know where I read it, because when you do a radio show, you read a lot of columns, that said now they've changed the language to we have to stop carbon-based emissions to we have to stop carbon-based usage. And the reason that shift is happening is because carbon capture technology is almost ready to scale. So we will be able to burn natural gas, coal, without releasing carbon to the atmosphere. So now the language is changing. They're shifting the goalposts once again. And that, more than anything, makes it seem truly nefarious.
So I'll give you another kind of fun statistic, and I know Robert Price is here. He's one of the world's experts on this stuff. But here's a pretty amazing statistic. So any of you live in California, by the way? I'm sorry. No, I mean, it's a great state. It's been ruined by politicians. But, you know, you had those wildfires in California last year. And now we've had these wildfires in Canada, right? And it's tragic what's happened with the millions of acres of trees that have been burned down. Those wildfires, Mandy, have emitted so much carbon into the atmosphere that they have negated every program the left has put in place over the last 10 years to reduce carbon emissions. So what I'm saying is, and by the way, we've spent $3 trillion on these crazy climate change policies. And what I'm telling you is we could spend with 1/10 of the money that we spent on solar panels and wind panels and electric batteries and blah, 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 all these other crazy things. With 1/10 of the money, if we just did better forest management, we'd have less greenhouse gases in the environment. So why don't we just do that? And incidentally, I just right before I came on the stage, I got this Wall Street Journal update. I don't know if you get that on your, but did you see this, or this announcement by Biden?
I bet Jerry did.
Joe Biden just announced that they are changing the name of the BATF. Have you seen this?
No.
It's now going to be called the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, Air Conditioners, Gas Stoves. I mean, they want to make everything illegal. I mean, these people are crazy.
Here's a question that I have a feeling might get, don't you wish Steve would come out of his shell a little bit when he talked about this stuff? Isn't the Fed's interest, or aren't the Fed's efforts to cut inflation with interest rates a waste of time?
Based on what?
They're just asking, are the Feds playing a fool's game by raising interest rates to fight inflation? And I think the implication is, until we control spending, can we truly control inflation?
Absolutely. So the way to control inflation right now is to reverse the spending spree, not to continue to raise rates. We've raised rates 11 times, I think it's 11 times, and it looks like they may do a 12th time. So it was basically a zero federal funds rate a year and a half ago. Now it's up to close to 6%. Now, why does that matter? Did you all see what happened with mortgage rates this week? Yeah. Any of you see that? We are now up to a 7.2% average mortgage interest rate in the United States. Again, anybody know what the mortgage interest rate when Trump left office? 2.9%. Now, that difference between a 2.9% mortgage rate and a 7.2% mortgage rate, if you want to buy a median price home in the United States, and you're paying that highest mortgage rate, you're going to pay $1,000 a month more in mortgage payments. And you're going to pay over the life of the loan almost $40,000 more for that home. This is what Bidenomics is doing. It's destroying the middle class. It's destroying young people's ability to buy a new home. I mean, everything that he's been touching has been completely wrong. And then, of course, he wants to raise pay attention, by the way, folks, to what happens. I think there's maybe a 1 in 3 chance that the Democrats could run the field in 2024, God forbid, but I'm going to put those odds at about 1 in 3. If that happens, look at what Biden has proposed this year. They want to raise taxes on investment, they want to raise the dividend tax, the corporate income tax rate, the capital gains rate. They want to have if you've been following this, they want to have a new tax on unrealized capital gain. So let's say you bought a farm for $200,000 and maybe 25 years later it's worth $2 million. You'd have to pay a $1.8 million tax on that $1.8 million. How are people going to do that? They still own the farm. People would literally, under the Biden tax plan, have to sell the farm to pay the taxes. This is craziness. The average tax on investment under that plan would be about 60%. Who's going to invest in America at a 60% tax rate? Nobody is. All that money is going to flow out. When we did the Trump tax cut, by the way, we had what we called a repatriation tax. We said if these companies bring money back into the United States, we'll just charge you 10%. We brought $1.2 trillion back in the United States that was invested here. That's what we need to do.
I'm going to ask this question, and you might get so animated you fly off the stage. Does the Federal Reserve have a place in conservative economics, or should it be abolished? Don't they bear a lot of responsibility for the spending?
Thank you for bringing that up, because many of you probably know I was nominated by Donald Trump to be on the Federal Reserve Board, and as soon as that happened, my closet door opened up and all the skeletons fell out. It didn't end
But it was
well.
nice to piece
But
together
what
your
was
20s.
interesting about that experience, though, two things that I want you to know about that experience. Number one, there was this indignancy. Like the Fed is some kind of weird club. It's like a club. And people think they're like oracles over there, that they have like some connection with God or something. These are just, they have 400 PhD economists at the Fed, and they keep getting it wrong, right? So what I said was, let's just have a rules-based monetary system. Now, my friend Steve Forbes, how many of you would be in favor of a gold standard? Raise your hand. Some of you are, some of you aren't. I'd go, it'd be much better than what we have right now. What I want is just look at commodity prices and let's see how they, you can look on your phone right now, you can find out what's happening with commodity prices, gold, silver, cotton, copper, wheat, blah, blah, blah. If those prices are rising, then we've got inflation, we have to, raise rates to lower it. And so I wanted a rules-based economy. Oh my God, the revolt against that. It was like I was some kind of invader of their club. So yeah, I think we have to get rid of this make it up as you go along policy at the Fed. And the second thing is that I want you to know, because some of you may recall this, like, it lasted about 6 months, but, I was a wife beater, I was this, I was that, blah, 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 and what's so interesting is I kept, telling, well, maybe I should drop out, this isn't going so well. There was one person who stood beside me and supported me the whole way over that 4-month period. Who do you think that was, Mandy?
Has to be Donald Trump.
Donald Trump. There's a side of Donald Trump, and I know everybody in this room probably has different opinions about Trump, but there's a real side of Donald Trump that people don't know about. He is a good man. He really is a good man. So.
One of the first questions that was asked is a specific question. If we're talking about shrinking the size of government, where do you do that? How do you do across-the-board cuts? I know that Senator Rand Paul, I'm a huge fan of his. He's proposed a budget every year that started out as a penny plan that would have required 1%.
I like that.
Now it's up to a 5-penny plan. It's a nickel plan
Right.
because spending has gotten so out of control. How do you begin to approach that in a practical manner?
Well, I like, what Vivek is talking about. Let's eliminate 4 cabinet agencies. We don't need a Department of Labor. We don't need a Department of Education. We don't need a Department of, EPA. Let's get rid of those. I mean, and incidentally, you should know this, folks. What Donald Trump proved was that the deep state is very real. It is very real. This is not a figment of our imaginations. We're not conspiracy theorists. It is real. And when I see the president, I always tell him, it is really remarkable what Trump achieved in 4 years, given that virtually everyone in Washington was against what he was trying to do. I mean, seriously, they were undermining everything that he was trying to do. We have to cut the bureaucracy, right? And how about having a policy? Why do they have lifetime tenure? How many of you in this room have tenure that you can't be fired from your job? You can't fire a federal employee. No matter how bad they are, you can't fire them. Did you know that still over half of federal employees aren't showing up for work? COVID ended 2 years ago. I mean, this is a disgrace. This is a scandal. And so we need to do that. We need to cut the bureaucracy. And the other thing, just to give you a sense of how easy it would be, you want to balance this budget? If we just went back to the amount of money that we were spending before COVID in 2019 and just said, okay, we're just going to spend in 2023 what we spent in 2019, I just balanced the budget. Is that so hard?
Didn't the COVID money become part of the baseline, though?
Yeah, that's
the
what
thing
they
that people
did.
don't understand.
Exactly.
It never goes away.
Exactly.
It then becomes the new starting point for the next
That's
budget.
exactly right.
So Steve is going to be signing books out in the hallway. Tell us a little bit about Govzilla, how the relentless growth of government is devouring our economy. and our freedom.
Well, I just had predicted that, you know, we were going to see this massive growth of government, and it has happened. But I want to show you one other quick thing, if I may. I know we're running out of time here, but I think this is really important, you know, because I heard this. This is the other thing that I think is the most important thing that's
Wait a
going-
minute, go back to that slide. Go back to
What's
the
that?
Newsom slide just for a second.
So I was listening with fascination to the discussion you guys just had about, you know, with Jerry Baker, and that was a great discussion. I learned a lot from it. Look, the United States of America is more divided ideologically than any time in history since the Civil War. And I don't say that with any happiness. I don't think it's a good thing, but it's a reality. We are two countries today. We are red state America and we are blue state America. And if you go to California and then you go to Florida, it's like going from Venus to Mars. I mean, there's nothing that's in common in terms of what's happening in these blue states versus red states. Now, here's one, it's really kind of fun. When I debate liberal economists and they defend all these big government policies, I love to show them this chart because here's one thing that no liberal, big government, socialist, progressive can explain. If their policies work so well, then why is everybody leaving, right? And so the biggest thing that's happening in America that nobody is paying attention to, nobody, not in the political class, is this massive migration out of blue states into red states. And it's happening year after year after year, and it's accelerating. It's accelerating. So look at Florida and Texas. Look at the massive 3.5 million people on net have moved to Florida in just the last 10 years. Now, you know, in Tennessee, by the way, Florida, Texas, and Tennessee have had the biggest in-migration of any states over the last decade. What do those three states have in common?
No state income, or
No income tax,
income
right?
tax, yeah.
No income. You don't think taxes matter? Why is it that those states are growing so fast? Now, then look at the blue states that are in you can't even see, you can't even see that, what's happened in California and New York because my picture is blocking it. But they are hemorrhaging people and businesses. And it's happening day after day after day after day. There, now you can see it. 2.1 million people on net have left New York. California. Now, by the way, when I debated Paul Krugman on this a number of years ago, do you all know who Paul Krugman is? He's one of the big left-wing economists, probably the most important voice in the left-wing movement among economists. And I debated on this, and I said, Paul, if these policies work so well, why are all these people leaving blue states? And he said, well, they're leaving the blue states because of the weather. They want to go to warm states. And then, by the way, that's not a completely stupid thing. And if you had to live in Minneapolis, Minnesota, or Fort Lauderdale, Florida, there's advantages. But then I hit him so hard below the belt, and I still feel bad about this. I said, well, that's interesting, Paul. You're saying people are moving out of blue states and to red states because of the weather. Gee, I know I'm not as smart as you are, but then why are people moving out of San Diego to move to Houston?
Yeah.
Right? Because nobody moves from San Francisco to San Diego to Houston for the weather. They're leaving because they want economic freedom. And that, I think, is really critical. How many of you in this room live in a red state? Raise your hand. How many of you live in a blue state? Yeah, so how many of you live in New York or New Jersey? What are you still doing there? I mean, come on. It's just, these states are, you got New York, which is supposed to be the financial capital of the world, and they have the highest taxes on capital. That'd be like, Idaho having the highest taxes on potatoes. And it just doesn't, none of this makes any sense.
You can meet Steve outside. He's going to be signing copies of his new book. I hope you pick it up and read it. And just so you know, this is how Steve is all the time. It's not just for us. This is why I have him on my radio show and love having him as a guest. I ask him one question, he talks for 20 minutes.
We are going to win. This election coming up is going to be so incredibly important to the future of our country. And I don't know if it's going to be Trump or whether it's going to be, we've got Ron DeSantis, we've got great candidates, but we have to win because what they want to do is make every state in America look like New York and California and New Jersey. And I say, hell no to that. All right?
Steve Moore, everybody.
Thank you.